I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern that my late husband picked out 30 years ago, watching the evening news with a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the side table. The scent of lemon furniture polish still hung in the air from my afternoon cleaning when my daughter-in-law Amber walked in, reached for the remote without a word, shut off the television mid-sentence, and said with a cold smile, "Go to your room, old lady. This is my living room now." My son Marcus looked away, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the carpet as if it held answers he couldn't find in my face. "Before we begin, sweetheart, if this story touches you even a little, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where my family is tuning in from. My name is Vanessa Cole, and for 63 years I've built a life on simple principles. Work hard, love deeper, and always keep your home open to family. I grew up in a small neighborhood in Detroit where everybody knew everybody, where front porches were gathering places and Sunday dinners were sacred. My mama raised 5 of us in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, teaching us that family meant sacrifice, that love meant showing up even when it was hard. When I married Jerome at 22, we promised each other we'd build something lasting. He worked double shifts at the automotive plant while I cleaned houses during the day and took night classes to become a registered nurse. We saved every penny we could, lived in a cramped apartment for 8 years, ate more beans and rice than I care to remember, all so we could buy our first home before we turned 30. The house on Maple Street wasn't much when we got it, a modest 2-story with creaky floors and wallpaper that belonged in a museum, but it was ours. Jerome spent weekends fixing the plumbing, painting walls, building a deck out back where we'd have barbecues every summer. I planted roses along the front walkway, the kind my grandmother used to grow, and every spring when they bloomed, I'd think about how far we'd come from those days of counting quarters for gas money. Marcus was born 2 years after we moved in, our only child, our whole world. I worked night shifts at the hospital so Jerome could be with him during the day. Then I'd come home exhausted and still find energy to read him stories, help with homework, drive him to basketball practice. He was a good boy, a little quiet, a little shy, but with a heart as big as the sky. He'd bring me dandelions from the yard and call them roses, would save his allowance to buy me drugstore perfume for Mother's Day. Jerome died 7 years ago, a heart attack that came without warning, without mercy, without giving me a chance to say all the things I'd been saving for when we got old together. The house felt enormous after that, every room an echo, every corner a memory, but I stayed because this was our dream, the life we'd built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I worked extra shifts, took on overtime, made sure the mortgage was paid, the taxes current, the repairs done promptly. This house was my legacy, my proof that hard work and love could create something permanent in a world that felt increasingly temporary. Marcus grew into a fine man, worked in IT for a large firm downtown, made decent money, had a good head on his shoulders. He dated here and there through his 20s, nothing serious, and I never pushed. I just wanted him to find someone who'd appreciate him, who'd see the kindness in him the way I did. When he introduced me to Amber 3 years ago, I wanted so badly to like her. She was pretty, confident, worked in marketing at some trendy startup, talked about brands and strategies and engagement metrics in a way that made my head spin. From the beginning, something felt off, though I couldn't name it. She'd smile at me in that tight way, the kind that never quite reached her eyes, and call me Mama V in a tone that felt more mocking than affectionate. She'd walk through my home touching things, commenting on how vintage everything was, how dated the decor looked, how much potential the place had with the right updates. I'd smile and nod, tell myself she was young, that different generations had different tastes, that love meant accepting people as they were. Marcus seemed happy, or at least I told myself he did, but I noticed things, the way he'd grown quieter around her, how he'd check his phone constantly when they were here for Sunday dinner. How his laugh had become this careful, measured thing instead of the full belly sound I remembered from his childhood. When he told me they were getting married, I hugged him tight and said all the right things, but late that night I sat in the kitchen and cried into my tea, not quite sure why, just feeling like I was losing something I couldn't name. The wedding was small, modern, held at some industrial loft space that cost more for one evening than Jerome and I had spent on our entire wedding. I wore my best dress, smiled for photos, danced with my son during the mother-son dance, while Amber scrolled through her phone at the head table. When I suggested they take some of the leftover flowers home, she'd laughed and said, "Oh no, Mama V, those are so not my aesthetic. You can have them if you want to clutter up your house even more." They moved into a trendy apartment downtown, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place I'd see in magazines and wonder how anyone could afford. Marcus mentioned something about Amber's student loans being pretty substantial and how they were adjusting to married life financially, but I didn't pry. When they came for Sunday dinners, I'd send them home with leftovers, slip Marcus a 50 here and there when Amber wasn't looking, just wanting to help however I could. About 6 months after the wedding, Marcus started showing up alone more often. He'd say Amber was working late, had a networking event, wasn't feeling well, needed to catch up on projects. I'd serve him his favorite pot roast and watch him push food around his plate, his shoulders hunched like they carried weight I couldn't see. One evening I asked him directly, "Baby, is everything all right with you two?" And he'd looked up at me with these exhausted eyes and said, "We're fine, Ma, just figuring things out. Marriage is work, right? That's what you and Dad always said." I let it drop because he was right. Marriage was work, and maybe I was being an overprotective mother, seeing problems where there were just normal adjustments. But the worry sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold, keeping me up at night wondering if I should say more, do more, be more involved or less involved. Then about 4 months ago, Marcus called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual because he was normally at work. His voice had this strange, tight quality when he asked, "Ma, could Amber and I come by tonight? We need to talk to you about something." My heart dropped into my stomach, all those maternal instincts screaming that something was wrong, but I kept my voice steady and said, of course, I'd make dinner. They arrived at 6:30, Amber in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Marcus in his work clothes looking like he hadn't slept in days. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd rocked Marcus as a baby, where Jerome and I had watched countless movies on quiet evenings, where family history lived in every photograph on the mantel. Amber started talking, her voice syrupy sweet, about how they'd been reassessing their financial situation and looking at long-term planning. She talked about investment opportunities, about building equity, about smart money moves for young couples. I nodded along, not quite sure where this was going, feeling Marcus's tension beside her like a living thing. Then she got to the point. "Mama V, we've been thinking. You're all alone in this big house, and it must be so much work for you, so much expense. The property taxes alone must be eating into your retirement." I opened my mouth to say I was managing just fine, that my pension and savings were adequate, but she kept going. We were thinking, what if we all moved in together? Multi-generational living is very trendy right now. You could have your own space, we could help with the bills, and honestly, the equity in this house could be really useful for all of us. I sat there, trying to process what she was really saying beneath all the pretty words. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to jump in, to clarify, to explain, but he was staring at his hands, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally, I said, "This is my home. Jerome and I built this life here. I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking to change my living situation." Amber's smile tightened. "Of course, we totally understand. We just thought, at your age, wouldn't it be nice to have family around? To not have to worry about home repairs and yard work and all that stress?" I told her I'd been managing fine for 7 years since Jerome passed, that I had a handyman for major repairs, that my neighbor's son mowed the lawn, that I wasn't looking to give up my independence just yet. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Amber's smile frozen on her face and Marcus barely able to look at me. They left without staying for dinner, and I stood at the window watching their car pull away, feeling like something had shifted, like a foundation I'd thought was solid had revealed cracks I hadn't known were there. Over the next few months, the visits became more frequent but more strained. Amber would walk through my house like she was appraising it, commenting on how much the neighborhood had appreciated, how desirable this area had become, how lucky I was to have bought when I did. She'd say things like, "You know, Mama V, houses like this are worth so much now. Have you thought about what you'll do with all this equity? It would be such a shame to let it just sit here." I'd change the subject, offer more coffee, ask about their jobs, anything to steer away from these conversations that felt less like concern and more like hunger. Marcus grew quieter with each visit, his eyes apologetic but his voice silent, like he'd lost the ability to speak up for either of us. Then 2 weeks ago, they showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning, their car packed with suitcases and boxes. I opened the door in my bathrobe, confused, and Marcus said, his voice flat, "Our apartment had a pipe burst, major water damage. We need to stay here for a few days while they fix it." What was I supposed to say? This was my son, my baby, and he needed help. I opened my home, set them up in the guest room, cleared out closet space, made room in the bathroom for their things. I told myself it was temporary, that it would be nice to have company, that maybe this would be a chance to get to know Amber better, to build the relationship I'd been hoping for. I had no idea those few days would turn into a nightmare that would force me to choose between my son and my dignity. Which brings me back to that Tuesday evening, 3 days ago, sitting in my armchair watching the 6 o'clock news while a chicken was roasting in the oven for dinner. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the curtains Jerome had hung 15 years ago, and I was thinking about whether I should make mashed potatoes or rice as a side dish. I heard Amber's heels clicking on the hardwood floor before I saw her, that sharp, purposeful sound that had become the soundtrack of the past 2 weeks. She'd been working from home, taking over the dining room table with her laptop and notebooks and color-coded planners, treating my home like it was her personal office space. She walked into the living room, stood between me and the television, and held out her hand. "Give me the remote," she said, her voice flat without the usual pretense of politeness. I blinked at her, confused, and said, "Honey, I'm watching the news. It's almost over. You can have it in 15 minutes. I said give me the remote, Vanessa. She dropped the Mama V, dropped the fake sweetness, and I saw something in her eyes I'd been trying not to see for 3 years, something hard and entitled and mean. I held the remote closer to my side and said, "Amber, this is my house. I'm watching something. You can wait." That's when she snatched the remote from my hand, turned off the television with an aggressive punch of her thumb, and said the words that would change everything. "Go to your room, old lady. This is my living room now. If you want to watch your boring old people shows, you can do it upstairs on that tiny TV. Down here is for people who actually matter." Time stopped. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I looked past her to where Marcus had just walked in from the kitchen, his eyes wide, his mouth open, clearly having heard everything. I looked at him, my son, my baby, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to tell his wife she couldn't speak to his mother that way in her own home. But Marcus just stood there, his eyes dropping to the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders curling inward like he wanted to disappear. The silence stretched out, heavy and horrible, and I realized with crushing clarity that he wasn't going to say anything. He was going to let this happen. He was going to let her disrespect me, disrespect his father's memory, disrespect everything we'd built in this house. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky but my spine straight. I looked at Amber, really looked at her and saw her exactly as she was, entitled, greedy, cruel. I said, "Excuse me." walked past her like she was nothing, went to the entry hall, grabbed my purse and keys from the hook where they'd hung for 3 decades. Marcus finally found his voice. "Ma, wait, where are you going?" I turned back, looked at my son, and said, "I'm leaving my own house because apparently I'm not wanted here. Your wife has made that very clear, and you've made your choice by saying nothing." Amber laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh, come on, Vanessa, don't be so dramatic. I'm just saying we need to establish some boundaries about shared spaces now that we all live together." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You don't live here, Amber. You're a guest in my home, and guests who can't show basic respect don't get to stay." Then I looked at Marcus and said, "You have until tomorrow evening to decide if you're my son or her puppet. Choose wisely." I walked out my front door, got in my car, and drove away from the house Jerome and I had built, from the life I'd known for 30 years, from the son I'd raised to be better than this. I drove for 20 minutes before I realized I had nowhere to go. I couldn't go to my sister Lorraine's because she was visiting her daughter in Atlanta. My best friend Rita was recovering from surgery. Most of my close friends from the old neighborhood had moved to warmer climates or passed on. At 63 years old, I was essentially homeless, driven from my own house by my daughter-in-law's cruelty and my son's cowardice. I pulled into a hotel parking lot off the highway, one of those mid-range chains with clean rooms and free breakfast, and checked in with shaking hands. The girl at the front desk, couldn't have been more than 22, gave me a cheerful, "Enjoy your stay," and I almost laughed at the absurdity. Enjoy my stay. Like this was a vacation and not an exile. The room was generic, beige walls and floral bedspreads, and the faint smell of industrial cleaning products. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, my mind spinning through the events of the past 2 weeks, looking for the moment I should have seen this coming, the moment I should have put my foot down harder. The truth was, I'd seen it coming for months, maybe years. I'd watched Amber's interest in my house grow from casual comments to pointed questions to barely concealed calculations. I'd watched Marcus transform from my proud, independent son into this silent, hunched shadow who couldn't stand up to his wife, even when she humiliated his mother. And the worst part, the part that made my blood boil even as I sat alone in that sterile hotel room, was that she'd called it her living room. Not our living room, not even the living room, but my living room. Like she'd already mentally moved me out, like she'd already claimed my home as her own, and I was just an inconvenient obstacle to be removed. My phone rang around 8 o'clock. Marcus. I stared at the screen, watching his name flash, remembering 1,000 other times that name had appeared. Marcus fell off his bike. Marcus made the honor roll. Marcus got the job. Marcus is getting married. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times. On the 4th, he left a message. "Ma, please come home. We can talk about this. Amber didn't mean it the way it sounded. She's just stressed. We're both stressed. Please don't do this. Just come home and we'll figure it out." We'll figure it out. Like this was a problem we could solve with a calm conversation and some compromises. Like his wife hadn't just told me, in my own home, to go to my room like I was a child. Like he hadn't stood there silent, letting it happen, choosing her cruelty over my dignity. I texted back one sentence. "I'll be there tomorrow at 6 p.m. to pack some things. Make sure you've made your choice by then." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the highway traffic outside, the ice machine humming down the hall, the muffled television from the room next door, and I thought about Jerome. I actually talked to him out loud, which I hadn't done since the funeral. "What would you do, baby? Would you throw them out? Would you fight for this? Or would you say I'm being stubborn and proud and should just forgive them?" I could almost hear his voice, that deep rumble that had always made me feel safe. "Van, you know what you gotta do. You've always known. You just gotta be brave enough to do it." I woke up at 6 a.m., gritty-eyed and exhausted but clear-headed. I went down to the hotel breakfast area, poured myself coffee from the industrial-size urn, and sat with some rubbery scrambled eggs and dry toast, watching business travelers and families with small children move through their normal morning routines. There was a young mother with 2 little girls, maybe 4 and 6, both in matching pink jackets, arguing about who got to push the button for the waffle maker. The mother looked exhausted, overwhelmed, but when she settled their argument and kissed both their heads, I saw something in her face that I recognized. Fierce love, bone-deep commitment, the willingness to keep showing up even when you're running on empty. I wondered if that woman would someday have a daughter or daughter-in-law who'd treat her the way Amber treated me. I hoped not. I hoped she was raising those little girls to value respect and gratitude and basic human decency. Back in my room, I started making phone calls. First to my bank, confirming my accounts were secure, that only my name was on everything. Then to my lawyer, old Mr. Patterson, who'd handled Jerome's estate and our wills, leaving a message asking for an urgent appointment. Then to my sister Lorraine, who answered on the second ring. "Van, I was just thinking about you. How are you, honey?" I told her everything. The whole story poured out, about Amber's entitlement, Marcus's silence, being told to go to my room in my own house, spending the night in a hotel. Lorraine was silent for a long moment, then said, in a voice sharp as cut glass, "That little witch said what to you? And Marcus just stood there. Oh, hell no. Hell no, Van, you are coming to stay with me. I'm cutting this trip short. I'll be home by tonight." I thanked her, but told her I needed to handle this myself first, that I'd likely take her up on that offer, but I had to face this head on. She made me promise to call her after I went to the house, made me promise not to let them guilt me into backing down. "You've given enough, Van. You've sacrificed enough. That house is yours, paid for with your sweat and Jerome's blood. Don't you let them take it from you." I spent the afternoon in that hotel room planning. I made lists of what I needed to pack, what I needed to say, how I needed to stand firm. I rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen different ways, imagining Marcus's guilt trips and Amber's manipulations, preparing myself not to cave. At 5 o'clock, I took a long shower, put on my best slacks and the blue sweater Marcus had given me last Christmas, the one he'd said made my eyes look bright. I fixed my hair, put on lipstick, looked at myself in the mirror. "You are Vanessa Cole," I said to my reflection. "You are not an old lady to be dismissed. You are not a doormat. You are a woman who built something real, and you will not let anyone take it from you." The drive back to my house felt longer than it ever had. Every red light an eternity, every familiar turn a reminder of what I was fighting for. When I turned onto Maple Street and saw my house, the house Jerome and I had made a home, I felt my resolve harden into something unbreakable. Marcus's car was in the driveway. Good. I parked on the street, gathered my purse, and walked up the front path past my roses, which were starting their spring bloom despite the emotional winter happening inside these walls. I used my key, because this was still my house, and walked in to find them both in the living room. Marcus was on the couch, looking like he hadn't slept either. Amber was curled up in my chair, my favorite chair, scrolling through her phone with a glass of what looked like my good wine in her hand. She looked up when I walked in and said, "Oh good, you're back. Marcus has been worried sick. This was all just a big misunderstanding." I didn't even acknowledge her. I looked at Marcus and said, "We need to talk, now, in the kitchen." Marcus started to stand, but Amber put a hand on his arm. "Anything you need to say to Marcus, you can say in front of me. We're married. We don't keep secrets." I looked at her directly for the first time since entering and said, "I'm not speaking to you, Amber. I'm speaking to my son. You can either stay here quietly or you can leave the room, but you will not insert yourself into this conversation." "Excuse me? This is my house, Amber. Those were your words. My living room, you said. Well, it's not your living room, it's mine. And in my house, when I ask to speak to my son privately, that's what happens." Marcus stood up, avoiding both our eyes, and walked toward the kitchen. Amber's voice followed him. "Marcus, don't you dare walk away from me right now." He stopped, turned back to her, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker, of something like a spine. "I need to talk to my mother, Amber. Give us a few minutes." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework, where Jerome and I had paid bills and made plans, where we'd had 1,000 family meals. The chicken I'd been roasting 2 nights ago was probably spoiled in the oven by now, another casualty of this disaster. I didn't wait for him to start with excuses. "Marcus, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear me. What happened 2 nights ago was unacceptable. Your wife was cruel, disrespectful, and entitled. She treated me like an unwanted burden in my own home, and you said nothing." "Ma, she didn't mean—" "Stop. Don't tell me what she meant. I know what she meant. I've watched her circle this house like a vulture for 3 years, calculating its value, planning how to get her hands on it, and you've let her. You've enabled her. You've chosen her treatment of me over your loyalty to your family." Marcus's face crumpled. "I don't know what to do, Ma. She's my wife. I love her, but she's not who I thought she was. Everything is about money with her, about status, about what we should have and what we're missing out on. She's drowning in debt from trying to keep up appearances, and she's convinced that your house is the solution to all our problems." "My house? Marcus, what are you talking about?" He put his head in his hands. "She wants us to move in permanently. She wants you to sign over the house to us, maybe let you stay in the guest room, but give us full ownership. She says it's the smart thing to do, that it'll help with our debt, that we can use the equity, that you're not going to live forever anyway, so why not do it now?" I sat back, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "She wants me to give her my house? The house your father and I built? And then live here as a guest in my own home? And you're even considering this?" "I'm not considering it, Ma." I told her no. I keep telling her no, but she won't let it go. Every day it's the same conversation, the same pressure, the same manipulation. She threatens to leave me. She says I don't care about our future. She says I'm choosing my mother over my wife. I feel like I'm drowning, Ma. I don't know how to fix this. I reached across the table and grabbed his hand, made him look at me. "Baby, listen to me. You can't fix this because you didn't break it. Amber broke it. Her greed broke it. Her entitlement broke it. And if you stay with her, if you keep trying to appease her, it will destroy you. It's already destroying you. I can see it." What am I supposed to do? Leave her? Get divorced after 2 years of marriage? Admit I made a mistake? I'm 34 years old, Ma. I feel like a failure. You're not a failure for leaving a situation that's toxic. You're not a failure for refusing to betray your mother to satisfy your wife's greed. But you will be if you continue to let her treat me this way, if you continue to stand silent while she tries to take everything your father and I built. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then I said, "Here's what's going to happen. Amber leaves this house today, now. She packs her things and goes. Whether that's back to your apartment or to a hotel or to her mother's house, I don't care. But she is not spending another night under my roof." "Ma, I'm not finished. You can stay tonight if you need time to think, but you need to make a choice, Marcus. You can work on your marriage, get counseling, try to help Amber understand why this is wrong. But you cannot do that here. And you cannot do it while she's actively trying to manipulate her way into owning my home. And if you choose to stay with her, if you choose her behavior over basic decency to me, then you need to know that our relationship will be permanently damaged. I love you, Marcus. I will always love you. But I will not be disrespected in my own home. I will not be treated like a burden or an inconvenience. And I will not give up the house your father died working to keep just so your wife can pay off her credit card debt." We walked back into the living room together. Amber looked up from her phone, irritated. Finally, "Marcus, tell your mother she's being ridiculous and we can all just move forward." Marcus took a deep breath and said, "Amber, you need to pack your things. You're leaving today." Her face went through several emotions in quick succession: shock, disbelief, fury. Excuse me? I'm not going anywhere. We live here now. Tell her, Marcus. Tell her we talked about making this permanent. No, Amber, you talked about it. You pushed and manipulated and tried to guilt me into going along with it. But this is my mother's house. She's not signing it over to us. She's not giving us anything. And you can't stay here after how you treated her. Amber stood up, her face ugly with rage. Oh, I see how it is. You're choosing mommy over your wife. You're such a coward, Marcus. A pathetic mama's boy who can't stand up to a bitter old woman who's too selfish to help her own family. I stepped forward. I'm going to give you 30 minutes to pack your things and get out of my house, Amber. And I'm going to give you one piece of advice. You might want to learn the difference between family helping family and family being exploited by a greedy, entitled person who married for money and opportunity. Married for money? She laughed, harsh and mean. Look around, Vanessa. You think this house is wealth? This dated, cramped little house in a middle-class neighborhood? You think you're rich because you own property? I make more in a year than you probably made in your whole career as a nurse. I don't need your house. I wanted to help you, to give you a graceful way to downsize, to not end up alone in some nursing home. But fine, keep your precious house. Die alone in it for all I care. I'd rather die alone in the house I built with love than live surrounded by people who only see me as an asset to exploit. Now you have 28 minutes before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Amber grabbed her phone and purse and stomped up the stairs. We could hear her upstairs, slamming drawers, throwing things into luggage, cursing. Marcus stood next to me, tears running down his face, his whole body shaking. I pulled him into a hug. This son who'd grown a foot taller than me but who still fit into my arms like he had when he was small. It's going to be okay, baby. It's going to hurt, but it's going to be okay. 25 minutes later, Amber came down the stairs with 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag, her face a mask of cold fury. At the door, she turned back and said to Marcus, "If you let me walk out that door, we're done. I'm not coming back to this. It's me or her. Choose." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "I choose my mother. I choose decency. I choose not becoming the kind of person who would ask someone to give up their home for my benefit. I'm sorry, Amber. I'm sorry I couldn't be what you wanted, but I can't do this anymore." She left without another word, her heels clicking down the front walk, her car door slamming, the engine revving as she peeled out of the driveway like a teenager having a tantrum. The house was silent after she left, the kind of silence that feels both peaceful and sad, like the aftermath of a storm. Marcus stayed that night. We ordered pizza, something we hadn't done together in years, and sat in the living room watching old movies, not talking much, just being together. Around midnight, he started talking, really talking, about the past 2 years, about how Amber had changed after the wedding, or maybe shown who she really was, about the pressure and the guilt and the constant feeling that he was failing her no matter what he did. I listened, didn't interrupt, just let him get it all out. When he finished, I said, "Baby, love shouldn't feel like drowning. Love shouldn't make you choose between your dignity and your partner's approval. What you had with Amber wasn't love. It was manipulation dressed up in wedding vows." He nodded, looking exhausted but lighter somehow, like confession had lifted a weight. "Thank you, Ma, for standing up for yourself, for not letting me just go along with this. I know I should have done it myself, should have protected you, should have said something 2 nights ago. I'm so sorry I didn't. You're my son. You're human. You made mistakes, but you corrected them. That's all I can ask." The next few days were a process. Marcus moved his things out of the guest room and back to his apartment, which the building management had already repaired. He and Amber had several phone conversations, each one shorter and colder than the last, before he finally told her he wanted a divorce. She threatened him, tried to claim she deserved part of his savings, part of their assets, even though they'd kept separate finances. Mr. Patterson connected Marcus with a good divorce attorney who handled the whole thing efficiently. Amber ended up with nothing from the marriage except her own debts and the realization that her manipulation tactics didn't work when people finally saw through them. My sister Lorraine came to stay with me for a week just to make sure I was okay, and together we deep cleaned the house, erasing any trace of Amber's brief occupation. Lorraine kept saying, "I knew that girl was trouble. I told you at the wedding, remember? I said she had hungry eyes." Word got around the neighborhood, the way things do in communities where people have known each other for decades. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, brought over a casserole and a bottle of wine and said, "I saw what happened, Vanessa. Good for you for standing up for yourself. Too many of us just take it when family treats us badly." My friend Rita, recovered from her surgery, threw me a liberation party with our whole church group, celebrating my strength and independence. Marcus started therapy, working through the patterns that had let him fall for Amber's manipulation in the first place, learning to trust his own judgment again. He came for Sunday dinner every week, and slowly our relationship healed, became stronger than it had been before because it was built on honesty now, on having survived a real test. 3 months after Amber walked out, Marcus was doing better. He'd lost that hunched, defeated look. His laugh was back, real and full. He told me one Sunday over pot roast, "Ma, I know this sounds weird, but I'm grateful this happened. If it hadn't, I'd probably still be married to her, still miserable, still letting her treat both of us badly. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing." I reached over and squeezed his hand. That's maturity, baby. Understanding that hard things can be good things, that standing up for yourself, even when it costs you, is always worth it in the end. Now, sitting here in my living room, in my favorite chair that Amber tried to claim as hers, I think about what this whole experience taught me. I learned that family doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity or your hard-earned assets to keep peace. Real family respects you, values what you've built, appreciates what you've sacrificed. I learned that sometimes the people we love make choices we don't like, but we can't save them from themselves. Marcus had to decide who he wanted to be, what kind of man he wanted to be, and I couldn't make that choice for him. All I could do was stand firm in my own boundaries and hope he'd find his way. I learned that homes aren't just buildings. They're symbols of everything we've worked for, everyone we've loved, every sacrifice we've made. Jerome and I poured our lives into this house, and I was right to fight for it, to refuse to let someone take it just because they wanted it. I learned that being called old lady as an insult says more about the person saying it than the person hearing it. I am older, yes, and I'm proud of that. I'm 63 years old. I've lived, loved, lost, survived, and thrived. My age is my badge of honor, not my weakness. The hardest part of this whole emotional story wasn't Amber's cruelty. It was watching my son struggle to find his spine, watching him weigh his loyalty to me against his commitment to his marriage. But seeing him finally stand up, finally choose dignity over dysfunction, was one of the proudest moments of my life. Today, my house is peaceful again. I wake up in my own bedroom, make coffee in my kitchen, watch the news in my living room without fear of being told to go to my room. Marcus comes by regularly, and we've rebuilt trust. He's even started dating again, a nice woman named Keisha who works as a teacher, who treats me with respect, who understands that a man who loves his mother is a man who knows how to love, period. I met with Mr. Patterson and updated my will, making sure everything is legally protected, that my wishes are clear, that no one can manipulate or contest what happens to my property. When I die, this house will go to Marcus, as I always intended, but on my terms, with my timeline, as a gift of love rather than a response to pressure. Sometimes I think about what I would say to Amber if I ever saw her again, though I hope I never do. I think I'd tell her that you can't build real wealth on other people's losses, that manipulating people doesn't make you smart, it makes you lonely. I'd tell her that the house she wanted so badly would never have brought her happiness because happiness doesn't come from taking, it comes from building. But mostly, I don't think about her at all. She was a chapter in my life, and a chapter in Marcus's life. But she's not the story. The story is about a woman who stood up for herself when it would have been easier to just give in. About a mother who loved her son enough to risk their relationship to save his soul. About a house that represented more than walls and floors, but represented a lifetime of work and love and sacrifice. I'm grateful I had the strength to grab my keys and leave that night. I'm grateful I didn't let guilt or fear or loneliness make me accept treatment I didn't deserve. I'm grateful that Marcus found his courage, even though it took him longer than I wished. And if you're reading this, if you're hearing this real-life story and recognizing yourself in it, whether you're the parent being disrespected or the adult child caught in the middle, I want you to know something. You don't owe anyone your home, your savings, your security, or your dignity. Not even family, especially not family who treats you like a burden instead of a blessing. Stand up for yourself. Set boundaries. Walk away if you have to, and trust that the people who really love you will either walk with you or find their way back to you eventually. My story had a relatively happy ending, but I know not everyone's does. Some people lose their children to toxic partners. Some people lose their homes. Some people never get the apology or the restoration they deserve. If that's you, I see you. Your worth isn't determined by whether someone else recognizes it. Your dignity isn't diminished because someone tried to take it from you. This is why I wanted to share this family drama, this emotional story of betrayal and recovery, because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in their living room being told they're too old, too difficult, too much of a burden, and they need to know they're not alone. They need to know that fighting for their dignity isn't selfish, it's necessary. They need to know that real love doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. My mama used to say, "Baby girl, you teach people how to treat you." I taught Amber she couldn't disrespect me. I taught Marcus that silent complicity has consequences. And I taught myself that even at 63, even after loss and grief and disappointment, I still had the strength to stand up and say no more. The house on Maple Street is still standing, the roses are blooming, and I'm still here in my favorite chair, watching the news when I want to, making Sunday dinners for my son, living the life Jerome and I built together. It's not perfect, but it's mine, earned through hard work and protected through hard choices. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from disrespect, even when it's your own home you're walking out of, trusting that truth and dignity will eventually prevail. Sometimes loving someone means refusing to enable their worst choices. Sometimes being strong means standing alone until the people you love remember how to stand with you. I grabbed my keys and left that night not knowing where I was going or what would happen next. But I left with my dignity intact, my boundaries clear, and my self-respect solid. And 3 months later, I walked back into my house, my home, on my terms, having taught everyone involved a lesson about respect that they'll carry for the rest of their lives. That's the real story. Not that I was disrespected, but that I refused to accept it. Not that my family failed me, but that I loved them enough to stand firm until they found their way back. Not that I almost lost my home, but that I fought for it and won. I'm Vanessa Cole. I'm 63 years old. I'm a mother, a widow, a retired nurse, and a homeowner. And I'm no one's old lady to be dismissed. I'm a woman who knows her worth, protects her boundaries, and refuses to apologize for either. So the next time someone tells you to go to your room in your own house, I hope you'll remember my story. I hope you'll grab your keys, stand up, and walk out with your head high. And I hope you'll have the strength to stand firm until respect returns, because you deserve nothing less. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own struggles or gave you strength for battles you're facing, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your own stories in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Let's build a community of people who refuse to accept disrespect, who stand up for dignity, who understand that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Thank you for listening to my story. May you always know your worth, protect your peace, and never ever let anyone make you feel small in spaces you built with your own hands. This is Vanessa Cole, reminding you that respect isn't negotiable, boundaries aren't optional, and your dignity is always worth fighting for.